Good evening and welcome to the regular school board meeting for District 833. It is Thursday, January 9, 2020, and it is about 6:37 p.m. We're in the District Service Center in Cottage Grove, Minnesota. If there are people standing, so we do have this streaming in the front with the TVs. If you'd like to find a seat, there is seating available if you'd like to do that. All right, so 1.0 is roll call.
Pat Driscoll is absent. Heather Hirsch. Michelle Whitty is absent. Katie Schwartz. Sharon Van Leer. Ron Kath is absent. Tracy Burnett.
Here. Thank you. So our first call to order this evening is our oath of office for our new board members. So if you all would join me at the front. All right, yeah, if you wouldn't mind, just join me up front. All right, well, welcome everyone. It is an honor that you were elected to guide the education of our community's children. As you recite the oath of office, you assume a tremendous responsibility as a director of our school district with the duties empowered by the Minnesota legislature. This power puts you and other members of our school board in the position of being both morally and legally responsible for equitable, quality education of every student in the district. In carrying out this responsibility, you'll be asked to fulfill the role of vision, structure, accountability, and advocacy. In providing vision, the board, with extensive participation of the community, envisions the community's educational future and then formulates the goals, defines the outcomes, and sets the course for public schools. To achieve the vision, the board establishes a structure and creates an environment designed to ensure all students the opportunity to attain their maximum potential through a sound organizational framework. Because as a board, we must be accountable to the community, we must ensure a continuous assessment of student achievement in all conditions affecting the education of our children. As board members, we serve as education's key advocate on behalf of students and our community schools to advance the vision for our schools. Furthermore, we must strive to work together with the superintendent and staff to lead the district toward fulfilling the vision we have created, fostering excellence for every student in the areas of academic skills and knowledge, citizenship, and personal development. So if you would please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I affirm that I affirm that I will support.
I affirm that I will support
the Constitution of the United States,
the Constitution of the United States,
and of this state.
And of this state.
And that I will discharge faithfully.
And that I will discharge faithfully.
The duties of the office.
The duties of the office.
Of school board member.
Of school board member.
Of Independent School District 833.
Of Independent School District 833.
To the best of my judgment and ability.
To the best of my judgment and ability.
So welcome, Simi, Melinda, and Louise.
Thanks.
'Yeah, thank you. Okay. 2.0, please rise and join me for Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
3.0 is the approval of our agenda. I will entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Sharon, second by Katie. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. 4.0 is our election of officers. And at this time, we will entertain a motion to accept nominations.
Okay, ready? Tracy Brunette, Chair. Katie Schwartz, Vice Chair. Sharon Van Leer, Clerk. And Pat Driscoll, Treasurer.
All right, thank you. So Sharon has presented a slate of officers. Are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? And finally, I have to ask one last time if there are any other nominations. All right, so hearing none, all in favor of the slate of officers as presented, please say aye.
Aye.
Oh, sorry. Did I get a second? Sorry. So moved by Sharon, second by Katie. All right, now we can take a vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you all. 5.0 are the organizational items for 2020, and we will accept these all in one vote as well. So I will entertain a motion to accept our organizational items.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Katie and second by Sharon. Sorry, it's been a year. So do we have discussion? If anybody has, or no questions? Okay. So any questions or comments on any of the items? All right. So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. 6.0 are the consent items. All consent items are considered routine and non-controversial by the school board and will be approved by a single motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items, but prior to the meeting, board members did have the opportunity to review them and could have requested that one be moved to an action item. That didn't happen this evening, so I will entertain a motion to accept our consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
It's moved by Louise, second by Katie. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. 7.0 are workshop items. 7.1 is our conversation with our legislators and Superintendent Jacobus.
Well, we are very fortunate to have supportive legislators, and I want to start by thanking you for spending some time with us this evening. It's amazing that we're talking about a new session. It seemed like the last one just got over, which it probably for you just did a few minutes ago. But we can't thank you enough for talking about priorities that we see in our district, and then we're very interested in hearing your vision for the session and things that you hope to bring forward. So what I'd like to do, there's a lot of people here, and everybody's here because of you guys, so thank you. You draw a crowd, which is good. But so I'll go around and introduce our district folks and come around to you and start with Representative Juergens, and then give you a chance to introduce yourself and anything you want to say to begin with, and then we'll go through our priorities. And as I mentioned before, the workshop agenda item, we voted to suspend Robert's Rules of Order to make it much more informal. So everyone will jump in as they'd like to, as far as a discussion as we go through these and throughout this session. So, Danny, if you just want to start at the end. And
I'm Dana Potratz. I'm the executive assistant for the school board and Superintendent Jacobus.
Corey Thompson, Director of Achievement and Integration.
Peppy Barton, Director of Communications.
Christine Schaefer, Assistant Superintendent.
Kevin Witherspoon, Director of Human Resources. Bob Lawrence, Director of Community Education.
Mike Johnson, Assistant Superintendent.
Kelly Jansen, Director of Teaching and Learning.
Julie Nielsen, Assistant Superintendent.
Dan Pine, Director of Finance and Operations.
Michelle Barris, Director of Student Services.
Tony Juergens, State Representative.
I was gonna.
Are we
you want us to just say our
You
names
can
and
say,
go on? or-
no, you can
Well,
talk,
first of all,
you can
this
make
is
a comment about
this is
anything you want.
my fourth such meeting. I appreciate you having these and getting the opportunity to hear what your legislative priorities are before we get into session. It does feel like we just left, and there's always so many things, so many opportunities for meetings throughout the year that it doesn't seem like we're ever really done. But we're looking forward to another session. The funding for the biennium was passed last year in a budget year. This is a bonding year. So there's going to be probably more policy that comes up. Senator Kent and I have a bill that we're working on together for school lunch shaming. You've probably heard of that on the news. So in fact, we just briefly spoke here this evening that we're continuing to try to get that right so that we can get bipartisan support and finally get that over the finish line. And with that, I'll just pass it on to Senator Bigham.
Thank you. I'm State Senator Carla Bigham, proud product of South Washington County Schools, and I have a PhD, a Park High diploma. And I just couldn't be more proud of the education that I did receive here in School District 833. And my mother worked here for 33.5 years, and my brother has worked here for a very long time as well. So the roots run deep. I am starting my third session in the Senate. Before that, I was on the county board and then in the House. So I've, probably been here about, I'm going to say six, maybe 7 times, and this is always very helpful and appreciate getting your perspective on this. And the one thing that I'm working on, and I have been for now the third session, and we just can't seem to get it across the finish line, is school threat assessment teams, and that plays into mental health services, but it plays into having an multifaceted role to try and be proactive about some of the stuff we see in our schools, and we can get it through. Each year we get it further. So hopefully this is the year when we're dealing with policy. So.
Thank you. My name is Ann Claflin. I'm the representative for about half of Cottage Grove, Newport, St. Paul Park, Great Cloud Island, and part of South St. Paul. I'm very impressed by the number of teachers who are here tonight. Thank you very much for coming to hear from us. I should have remembered and worn red for Ed myself. I'm very interested in hearing what your priorities are. I want to know how I can be most helpful to the district, helpful to giving you the flexibility you need to do the best for your students here. We know that we're still behind in the funding that we really want to give our school districts. And I want to know how I can be most helpful to our teachers as well, so they have all the resources they need in the classrooms.
Thank you. I'm Representative Tu Zhang, represent the Woodbury area, Maplewood, Oakdale, and the small town of Landfall. This is my first session and first time coming here to one of these meetings, and it's very exciting and a great privilege to see all the teachers here, all the family members that came to support our new members here. But I'm on all the tax committees, so we're trying to find ways to raise funds to pay for our schools, and really interested to see what your thoughts are on some of the legislative priorities that you have here. And so it's a privilege to be here.
Good evening. I'm Susan Kent, State Senator for Senate District 53, and my district includes the city of Woodbury and the southern parts of Maplewood and Oakdale and Landfall as well. It's really strange after feeling like the new kid around here forever. This is my 8th time to do this, and it's a real privilege, as always. But this is kind of weird because this is my first year when I get to say I'm a former parent in South Washington County Schools because my son graduated this past spring. So I'm here. I told my husband, I was like, hey, I get to go back to the DSC again, even though I don't have the same business I used to have. I want to thank you all for always amazing partnership in the work that we do for all the students that we're working on behalf. And I want to congratulate the new members of the school board. Welcome, and looking forward to working with you in this capacity as well, and with the rest of you as always. And just this, as has been said, and we'll go into more details. This is going to be one of the shorter sessions, so it'll be kind of quick once it gets started. But we'll hope to do good work as we always try to do for our schools and for our kids. And I'll just say, an issue that has been continued to be important for me, I've made some progress on it over the years, but I continue to work on it, is to make sure that we can fund from the state level as well as the local level more student support services personnel. The counselors, the social workers, the nurses, the school psychologists, the chemical dependency counselors, the ones who are really helping our kids who really need it. And we need more of that. Minnesota ranks at the bottom in the U.S. in those crucial support staff. And that affects our teachers, our classroom teachers, our administrators, and it certainly affects our kids. So going to keep fighting for that one.
Good evening, and thanks very much for the invitation. My name is Steve Sandell. I represent District 53B, which is most of Woodbury. I have 3 school districts in my district, and it's a privilege to be part of each one of those. South Washington County, North St. Paul, and District 834, which is Stillwater. I taught school for 25 years, and I've been in each chair around the room here as a teacher, twice as a school board member, as an administrator, and now as a legislator. And I'm not sure which side of the desk is the best one, but but I see all those red T-shirts out there. And a friend of mine asked me yesterday if I miss teaching, and I said every day. So it's great to be here. I'm on both the Education Finance Committee and the Education Policy Committee. My job, along with the rest of the legislators here, is to find a way that we can serve the students, their families, the teachers, the school board, the administrators, and our future. I believe strongly in civic education, and I don't just mean the social studies curriculum. I mean public education for all of us. It's been a real opportunity to hear the conversations that have come before our committees. I'm definitely interested in the way that teachers find satisfaction in the job they do, the way they feel that the voices are heard, and that the way they find coincidence in their goals with the board and the administration. Keith, thanks very much for the generosity you offered me in personal conversations and with other members of the board who've had a chance with whom I've had a chance to talk. Thanks very much for being here.
So a number of the items that we have, we know that it is not a funding year, but we know that there'll be discussions. It always happens, especially since there was discussions about a surplus. We're not expecting, so there are some funding things we just always want to have and remind. But we have some things unique to our system that we look at some policy changes that could be helpful. So we'll go through these, and as I said, people will take the lead to start explaining and then jump in to have the conversation, try to explain some of the details. So we have a great interest in online learning, and as we've rolled out online, there's been some things that we want to think about as far as what's in the statute, and ask Kelly Jansen. If the light is green, you're good. Yep.
Is it working now? Okay, good.
Yep.
All right. Good evening. As you know, we understand the need for flexibility in learning in space and time. We know learning doesn't happen within 4 walls, and online courses have been one way that families have accessed that opportunity. So anytime, anywhere learning. One thing that we've noticed over the last 3 years in our district in particular, our online enrollment has gone up around 250%. We have students who are taking courses outside of our district online. To remedy that, we worked with our teachers and have had many teachers step up, and we're going to offer 9 courses next year. So we're trying to meet that need, supply and demand. And so through those efforts, we're hoping that we can have some conversation regarding the legislation that prevents us from saying, if we offer this course, then we would hope that you take it through us, or we want you, or you must take it through us. If it's the same curricular offering, it has the same requirements. If it's offered within our district, that would be the first option for students and families. We're not asking to cut off options that we don't offer, but if it's within our district, we would ask that students take it from our district. So that was something we've had lots of conversations around. And there's certain language in the legislation that could be amended that would meet this. Our neighbors, which is a state I don't talk a lot about, Wisconsin, only because of the Packers. But they have some unique parameters around the circumstances in which students can take online. And so I would offer that if you want to have further conversations regarding that. I'd be happy to do that, but it was interesting to read the differences between their parameters and Minnesota's. Any questions right now, or I don't know how you want this? Like,
And as Kelly said, is we want kids to have that opportunity. In fact, a number of districts that I had been part of in the past required kids to take an online course because of colleges and all of the different learning. But we really have pride in our staff and the curriculum that we offer, and we want to make sure that kids are taking a course that's rigorous and would meet our standards. And as Kelly said, it's been very popular. Each trimester, kids will take a look at their schedule, and if there's an hour of the day that might work better for them, they'll select an online course. It's very easy and very wide open for kids to take online, which gives them a number of choices. It's just a matter of kind of bringing it in-house if we can. And with 9 course offerings, it's a small amount of classes that kids are taking, so that would be helpful. And with our growth, the other element that sometimes causes issues is there's a requirement that when a student has an online course during the period that you provide space for them to be in the school and have access to technology. The access to technology is fine, but in some of our high schools that have no space, the kids are left in the commons if that's workable. And so sometimes flexibility to say that we can offer that maybe in a different place if they need that. Or we have been, if it's at the end of the day, students are able to leave early because they can complete that work anytime they want. So that's the idea of online learning. And again, we're really supportive of it. It gives kids, our whole idea is more choice and more voice in what they want to take. So if we go to the left, coming down to flexibility, we've talked about this for a number of years, our lease levy situation and giving us flexibility. This is a perfect year for policy changes. And I'd ask Dan to just mention a few things with lease levy. It's similar to what we might have talked about. We are a district that is really impacted by this because of our growth and the ability that we take a look at the parameters that are already in place to maintain a maximum amount that we can lease levy. But because of the requirements behind it, and Dan can explain, we are really at a loss sometimes to add on to our schools in a way that would be the best for kids.
Good evening again. Yes. Put it simply, I mean, there's different ways of funding capital improvements and buildings and such. And one way is to use a lease levy. And the lease levy generally is used to lease instructional space, or if you're going to add on to a building, you could do what's called a land lease and build a new structure and then lease it back from the borrower until it's paid off. The lease levy is one in which the school board has a lot of control over because they can look at what we recommend and they can decide how much they want to levy. The one big issue we run into is when we build new things to our schools, the lease levy laws don't allow us to add the appropriate common areas or restrooms. Example, we added 12 classrooms to Woodbury Middle School. You figure that's 300 to 360 more kids, no place to go to the bathroom. When we do these things, it'd be nice if we could plan to add some common areas, collaborative learning places, and restrooms, and maybe cafeteria spaces. So generally, that's the gist of the request.
And I'm curious on the concern about that flexibility because it's not increasing the amount we can levy. We're still under the guidelines. So it's just a matter of, do you know the history behind that or why that might be a difficult piece to have folks support?
That helps. This is something we've been talking about. It makes perfect sense. We've seen these situations in a number of our buildings over the years because we've been a growing district for a number of years. And I mean, you speak about the restrooms and the common areas, you think about cafeteria space, everything that is increased when you look at in bringing more students into a building. So I'm going to keep working on it. And there are just things in there it's never really clear why they don't push through. But we'll work on this one and try to see if we can at least figure it out and keep working on it.
And if any of you have concerns, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I would like to know so I can work with you. So, yeah, we do appreciate it. As we go down again on the left side, then increasing local control and allowing local elected school boards to renew levies that have been passed once. And we've talked about this last year, and I think you're going to hear from every educational group, but you probably know that in surveying residents throughout the state, over 60% of the people support this, allowing a school board to have that authority. In the last 7 years, 92 renewals have been on the ballot. All 92 have passed. And so this is something that with the 10-year limit, if you know the history of this, originally there was no limit or cap, and then it was changed to first a 5-year limit, then it moved up to a 10-year limit, and then we have a cap. So we still have the cap, but with our levies and because of the as you know, the funding streams, we've come to rely on levies in school districts. We are out on the ballot campaign trail every other year, and it really puts us in a difficult situation with our community, because even with a renewal, at first you have to spend time explaining this. It's not that we're asking for anything more, but it does maintain your taxes. It doesn't. They would go down. So as you know, on the ballot it says that it would be an increase in taxes. But we spend a lot of time and money to do the renewals that pass on a regular basis. And even, as we said last year, even if we had just one opportunity so we could renew it once on our own, and again, I bring up city councils, the power that a city council has to levy taxes and do all sorts of things, and they are elected officials, that the community, if they don't like what they're doing, they can move with the election process to not have them. School boards are exactly the same way. And so that bit of flexibility, I think, would save us a lot of money. Our elections, if we're the only one on the ballot, cost anywhere from $50,000 to $60,000 to run an election. I'm looking at Dana to make sure I'm not saying that incorrectly. That's the number that I recall, and I can make sure I get that right. But it is it's a significant amount of money, but also the time. Once we are going to be on the ballot, we start in June. And we are doing over 100 meetings every time to make sure that we can answer questions. And so there's this one again. I'm curious. I know that there isn't support of letting them run out for longer. I did come from a state that once a levy was passed, it was there forever, and so that made a big difference in how people might look at it. But as you know, in 10 years of using a levy, we can't tease that money out easily. That if it fails, that we're going to easily move forward. It becomes part of our operating day to day, and it's a really important aspect of our funding.
Well, I'd like to say this is, as you know, Keith, a really contentious issue, and we hear lots of debate and discussion before both our policy and our finance committee in the House. I'd support this request. I know the effort of public education requires, and I know the expense that the school board has to spend on it. You know that I'm working, I have a bill which would eliminate operating referendum and would move the regressive taxes of income, sales, and property to a capital gains and an estate tax. And I worked hard on that the first session. I'll continue working on it, and I hope that I hope that it has a future. It would reduce homestead taxes by 20%. But in the near future, you can count on my support for this issue. And I'll speak up for it too. Please let me know when and where you think it's appropriate to work particularly hard on this one.
I'm looking around to my House colleagues. Did this pass in the House this year? For some reason, I thought it did. But it didn't go anywhere in the Senate, along with a number of things. But I agree. This is something I've supported and continue to support. You know, you make the case perfectly. It's a consistency issue within local government, and it's cost saving, and it just makes sense.
Just for our local district, the other thing that impacts us is our growth. So we anticipate another 3,000 kids in the next 10 years. So we have a long-term facility study that's going on now. So we're going to be on the ballot again because of reacting to the growth that our cities, we're fortunate to have growth. It's always a positive aspect. But then we have bonds that come forward. So what's difficult is I think it creates a real difficult situation, a relationship with our community if they are questioning, are you able to manage your dollars well enough that why are you always coming out and asking? Now bonds are a little different. People can understand when they see overcrowding and things, but we are a district that's really impacted by elections. So again, thanks for that consideration. So if we move up to, again, as I said, we know it's not a funding year, but we have just a reminder, and Michelle might talk a little bit about our cross-subsidy here on the funding piece, if there's dollars that get discussed, and we know there will, even though it's not
Okay. You may see me this spring and run around up there. I'm also serve as the chair of the MASBO Legislative Committee, so I'm up there a lot asking for formula increases on the funding, and all the school organizations are doing that. We understand that it was a 2%, and we're very grateful for that, but we're still lagging about $692 per student below what it should have been based on inflation over the last 20 years. And that can add up to a lot. I mean, it could either be $692 less that we need in operating levies, which would be tax relief, or it could be the dollars that are needed to reduce class size and keep things going. So I know that our organization, MASBO, we didn't put a specific dollar amount our district didn't here, and because we want to talk a little bit more about the special ed issue too. But most of the organizations are saying, if it works out, 1% would really help a lot in the supplemental year, just to get us a little closer to that gap we have from inflation over the last 20 years. The other issue we run into, and Michelle can talk a little bit more about the actual needs that arise, is that we have what we call a special education cross subsidy, and that is the difference between what it costs to provide the services to students with IEPs and what we actually get for aid. And that's running for our district about $17 million a year. I do need to acknowledge that strides were made last year. The first year, the legislature approved a 2.6% increase, or actually introduction of cross-subsidy aid, meaning that they took the 17 million and said 2.6% of that will give you that in a straight aid this year, and then put into law that 6.43% would be going on forever after that. Talking to Tom Melcher, his rationale for those numbers was really, he said, Dan, we're just trying to stop the increase. So it's still going to be about 17 million, but it's going to be 17 million relatively less to the total amounts. But at some point, someone has to look at the special ed funding, and we know that the federal government is behind. They promised 40% of the difference and never have risen above 13%. But the kids are still there, and we need to support them.
I feel like special education is always asking for more. I'm sure at the state level I've been in multiple districts in different areas, and it's the same thing. Special education never feels like they have enough, and even here when we're looking for staffing. But I'd like to explain a little bit about why that cross subsidy maybe happens. For our special education students, maybe in the past, you had speech students or students with learning disabilities, and usually that was one service provider. So for a speech student, they had a speech teacher. For a student with a learning disability, maybe a resource teacher. Now we have students with much more complicated or complex disabilities. A lot more common to have students with autism. In fact, that's one of our highest growing disabilities in our district, as well as students who have multiple cognitive and physical disabilities. So for a student with autism on their team, you need a school psychologist, a speech therapist, a teacher, an OT, a para professional, behavior support, admin support, and transportation. So that's usually sort of the base package of a student with autism. And so as you see, each of those personnel or those people, which take up most of our budget, adds up pretty quickly. The other thing about special education staff, I think they're more expensive because they have additional training. They're also harder to find. And so as we're trying to recruit the best people for our students, they are typically coming out of college at a higher rate in terms of their education than maybe a general education teacher. So those costs add up really quickly. We also have students that have a lot more complex medical needs and also mental health needs that it takes a team, it takes a village to make for having that student to make progress. And so as those costs add up really quickly, that's the cross subsidy grows really rapidly. Also something to consider, I know it's not a funding year, it's a policy year, is one of the things that impacts us indirectly for funding is transportation. I'll give that as an example. So we have students that open enroll from all over the state of Minnesota, and if that student is a special education student, we cannot deny them in our district. Likewise, if they are open enrolled in our district and we, through our child find process, determine it's a child with a special need, we then have to transport that child no matter where they come from. So I would really encourage you to take a look at some of our transportation policies in this next thing. And if I know there was a big court case coming out of, I think it was Osseo, in terms of trying to change that law for open enrolled students that we transport to the border, that it really take a look at that, because transportation is also another area that is understaffed in terms of trying to find bus drivers and having enough routes for our students. That's also very problematic for special education. And if we can consolidate some of those things to provide adequate busing for our students in district, then we could spend less resources with students that are out of district. It can get really expensive. The other thing maybe to consider is looking at some of our mandates. So there's federal regulations from IDEA, and then states have their own regulations. In a lot of cases, Minnesota is more restrictive in terms of special education law than federal, and I'm not really sure why that is. One example to look at is the evaluation. So federal law says you have 60 days to complete an evaluation and hold an IEP if a child qualifies. Minnesota broke that up into 30 and 30. And so for our school psychologists, especially at the elementary level, when you have so many students that needed to be evaluated in 30 days, you get a huge time crunch. And so that's a stress on staff. You need additional staff to do that. You're needing voucher pay. So that mandate of the 30 days results into dollars. And if we could spread that out a little bit, I know that it would buy some more time and some relief for all of that scheduling that happens. Also, with all the dates and the breaks that happen, it becomes really difficult to try and pack all of those in. So I would say take a look at some of those mandates and where Minnesota is more restrictive than federal law.
Thanks very much, and for the teachers in the room who work with students with special needs. I know that that's a demanding job, but I do have a couple things to say about that. I hear through the legislature and as a parent and as a teacher as well, the separation of students as special ed students and supposedly other students. I'd like to see if we could get rid of that different designation. I don't like the term cross subsidies. They are all our students. I taught for 25 years when I was at Humboldt Junior High School. Half of our students were students with IEPs, half. They weren't special ed kids, they were all of our students. I know that there may be special requirements in transportation or special requirements in classroom conversations. And I know that the federal government hasn't assumed its responsibility, taking up the 40% of expenditures we need for students with special needs. But I hope when you come to the legislature, and I guess, I'm speaking just to one school district here, but I'd like all school districts throughout the state to come to the legislature and say, we need help with all of our students. Some of our students are going to require additional services, a little bit more attention. But I taught long enough to know that there are students who are at the very top of the academic pile, I guess, and take a lot of time. And take resources as well. Again, let me just say that I believe all of our students are our students, and I'd like to. I really do take umbrage, I guess, with that. Though I know it's common to talk about this cross subsidy. They are all our students, and the money comes from our taxpayers as well in this general fund. So I guess that's just my special concern, for all of our students.
I want to talk a little bit about the fiscal part of this. Superintendent Jacobus, you've been saying, acknowledging that this isn't the budget year. We did the budget last year, and this is traditionally known as the bonding or the policy year. But when we have surpluses, sometimes there are supplemental spending bills. And so that will be coming up as a part of the discussion. And I'm glad we're having these conversations because these needs don't go away just because it's not a budget year. The challenge is, and I will try not to get in the weeds on the legal definition of surplus versus deficit, but it doesn't take inflation and expenditures into account. Nobody runs a business that way, but that's legally how we have to do it here in the state of Minnesota, as you all are all too familiar. And so when people hear that we have a surplus right now, it doesn't recognize that under current law, with the way things stand right now, because a lot of that is what we would think of as one-time money. It's not ongoing surplus. In a couple of years, with no changes at all, we will already be in a deficit situation. And the first people I think of when I hear that is our students, because that means we're not going to, at the state level, be able to do the inflationary increases without making some other changes somewhere in the budget. So we're already at that place. So anything that we incur this year that has tails, a term you all are very familiar with, we don't have it in the out years. And we're already there. So, these are big conversations we're going to have to keep having. I see some people wearing red who I know are having those conversations all over the state because it's important. The idea to index these parts of the formulas with inflation is an important one. I would say another important thing would just be to redefine budget surplus and deficit so that it more accurately reflects the economic situation. And I am really glad that we were able this year for the first time to make a big difference in that gap on special education costs for our students. And so that was very important. I really appreciate Governor Wall's leadership on that and the work that was done by a lot of people to make that happen. And we need to keep doing it.
I just want to say that if there are, you gave an example of where the state has a stricter requirement than the federal government, especially on special education. If you could put together maybe the top 5 or whatever that are the most costly or onerous, that would be helpful. And then, I think we can take a look at that and review that if that's helpful. Those are things to review that, as Senator Kent was saying, as you look in the out years, our money right now in 2 years out, we're at 100 million. That's it. That's all we have if you include inflation in it. And that is with a reduction in spending, actually, by the way, the overall amount. So these types of ideas that can save us money would be helpful if the economy, with the uncertainty, consumer confidence, election coming up, geopolitical stuff coming up that could impact the economy. I think it's important.
And we understood, in fact, we didn't have this on here because of the surplus, because we know first the requirements and what happens. And believe me, with our fund balance, we know how important it is to make sure that we have the savings. But I've seen in the deficit years where we still had budget things come forward. So we just wanted to add that. The other thing that you've asked in the past, and Susan, you had said it a number of times, tell us what are the specifics about the cross subsidies. So that's part of what Michelle was talking about with the policy that might impact. And then Steve, I agree with you completely. I always feel uncomfortable that when we talk about cross subsidy, it sounds like we don't want to fund. These kids take money from other kids, and that's not the case. We use it because it's a term that the legislature uses on funding, but we want to spend more money on our folks because those kids are going out in society and will be productive adults, and we need to give them the best education. So I know that we feel uncomfortable as we talk about that it sounds like we're supporting one group of students and another. So I appreciate you saying that. Just on the federal dollars, I always like to just remind us, Dan, our total budget with grants is $270 million. Okay, $250 million. We get $4.1 million, I think it is, from the federal government. It's a tiny, tiny amount. So 40% that they should will be helpful. but most of our issue comes through state dollars. So I think it's important to where we are with that. But again, we realize it's policy, and that's why we wanted to look at policy as well. So appreciate the comments. And
I just want to add, Michelle mentioned the number of students with autism increasing within our school district, and of course that's statewide and national as well. And Steve might remember we had on successive days in the Education Finance Committee, one day they were talking about the cost of educating children on the autism spectrum or on throughout the special education, and how those with autism was the cost of educating those students was drastically. And then the following day, they were talking, different people were presenting, but they were telling us about the number of students with autism that was increasing. So you take those two together, and it's unsustainable. There's no way that we can continue to educate those children without taking the money from somewhere else. We need the help from the federal government, and I was happy that Congresswoman Craig and Congressman Stauber together at the federal level have a bipartisan bill to help get closer to that 40%. I think the bill calls to get to 40%, but if we could even just get into the upper teens, it would help exponentially with your jobs of being able to fund the education, because it's coming out of the general fund. We all, that better than we do. And we recognize that there are constraints, but we're going to need the partners at the federal level to help us as well.
And to close that, I do want to thank you, as Dan did, for the work that you did last year with the increase that will come through the special ed funding and the general fund increase. It was wonderful where we are, and we've noticed our ability now to take a look at being a little bit more proactive. So I want to, every time we talk about funding, I want to acknowledge that we know you work very hard as lawmakers to find in a small dollar, or it's a small pie, I would say, that everyone is looking for a larger proportion that you did. It was wonderful what happened last session, so thanks for that. And I know we'll be talking about this though over and over. So, and then the next one was the school safety. Another great thing that happened was the dollars that came forward, the one-time dollars. And I asked Mike Johnson. Mike oversees our safety program through the district, and that flexibility to use those dollars toward support for students that are struggling with mental health and different aspects. So.
No, thanks so much. And first off, Tony, thank you for your collaboration with us when we meet with local law enforcement. We really appreciate that. And Carly, your comments on threat assessment and the work that we continue to do and we want to do for the kids, and Susan, your comments as well about mental health. Christine Schaefer and Christine's my colleague, and we're gonna talk a little bit about enhancing school safety and student mental health support by hopefully making that one-time additional safety funding permanent. But first off, as you know, student safety and security, it's an ongoing investment, and we can't adequately serve the schools through one-time funding. We're extremely grateful for the additional funds this year. However, our school safety priorities, both for infrastructure like cameras and visitor management systems, and then our ongoing professional development, demand ongoing financial support. These items are extremely expensive, even for one school. An example of that would be at Park High. Probably have 150 to 170 cameras at Park High. And just to install new cameras and the necessary infrastructure at Park would be over $180,000. Now, granted, that's one of our largest schools. High schools have far more cameras, but across our district, we have about 1,600 cameras. So we probably couldn't do that all at once, but we really have to be careful with that funding. And then I'll pass it along to Christine. Wish I had longer arms.
Right, so I'd just like to touch a little bit on mental health. So in our school district, as many of you mentioned, we're seeing an increase in students and families struggling with mental health. And so we have students experiencing trauma that has increased. And just a few examples that we're dealing with right now with some of our students in foster care, students with terminally ill parents, students coming to us with many forms of abuse, students dealing with gangs, drugs, sex trafficking, and homelessness. And so, as you know, when our students are coming into our classrooms with these forms of trauma and issues, we need extra resources and support to help them be successful. And so we, as Mike said, we really appreciate that one-time money of $600,000. But as we think about lowering our ratios, as you mentioned, Susan, and we have one-time money, it's hard to sustain that long term. And so we would like to provide more supports And I know Michelle had mentioned that too. And Steve, yes, you're correct. These are all of our kids. These are high performing kids. These are all of our kids that have these issues they're struggling with that we need to support them with to increase the success in our schools. So we would advocate for you to support that one-time money become permanent.
This is probably one of the number one topics that when I'm out in the community, I hear about. I mean, parents are worried about the safety of their children, and whatever we can do, working together to ensure that when parents drop their kids off at schools, they're getting the education, they're focused on that and not, worried about something going to happen. And I think that the more we can invest in mental health in the services side of it, because if kids are acting out here, it's more than likely because something is happening at home. And if we can resolve that, it keeps our kids safe. But you know what? It keeps our teachers safe in the room. It keeps the other classroom staff safe as well. And that is important. And when you look at, Steve said something about the enjoyment of the job in the beginning, and I think that goes a lot to it. I've at least probably 6 times a session meet with the various teachers that I in the district, and it's their leadership team. Most of that is talking about their safety in the room as well. That has the injuries and harm has increased because of the incidences that occur in the classrooms due to mental health. And the more as a community we can support these kids when, their parents are incarcerated or there's chemical dependency or mental health, that's important as well. And that is not, I mean, you're one of the component, but that's a whole community event.
And we're very proud of our teachers with our focus on personalization. They work really hard to get to know kids. So they know them well enough that when they walk in the classroom, they can tell right away something may not be right. And as you create those relationships, it's one element. It's not the answer, but it's the most important. And our teachers spend a great amount of time trying to get to know kids as Heath rather than a person in the classroom, which is we've had great success and positive cultures because of that. But then if you look at our support people, social workers and counselors, they are really, we're asking a lot of them to talk to adults. They're pulled into parent meetings to give parents guidance. They guide our staff, and the time they have to actually spend with kids to counsel, particularly social workers, sometimes is much more limited than we'd expect. So we're looking at those frameworks, and if that money becomes sustainable year after year, then we can look at a framework that lasts. So I appreciate that. Again, last year that was wonderful, that increase, and we're hoping, even though that, I mean, I think that would be a bit of a policy, even though it's funding, so that's, we want to bring that forward as well. Then we have just a few other, just some general things that we've talked about, and then I'd like to just hear any other thoughts that you have about the session, ways we can help you. We are certainly, as always, available to come down and talk, to testify, to give you any thinking about certain things that are coming forward. But a couple things, and we talked about this last year, is a little bit more flexibility with the state assessments, and this really is geared around the high school assessment and looking at that ACT test. Now, there's been you might have read a lot of discussion that colleges are thinking, will ACT be as important in the future? And it may not, but for the foreseeable future, it is an assessment that parents value, students value, and really as teachers, we look at the ACT as a high school staff and trying to prepare kids for that. And having the ability to use that as our MCA assessment, we're kind of judged on that. We already give it to all of our juniors. So we'd like to continue that discussion about flexibility, about how that might be looked at as the assessment versus some of the other things we do. We spend a lot of time assessing, and in our school year, sometimes we lose a number of days of instruction that gives us that chance to do the things that enrich kids' lives with the relationships and that. So that is what we mean by that more flexibility with state required assessments.
Accomplishments that are part of our past and the terrific work we're doing with most of our students. One of the things we hear at the legislature is the persistent gap between the achievement of high-performing students and those students who are struggling, primarily poor kids, kids of color, et cetera. And we're all concerned about that. And I'd like to invite you, all of you, and those in the audience too, to think about what ways this district might be able to address that issue. You know much better than we do up here about where that gap is in this district, why it may be exaggerated, and why and how we might be able to shrink that gap. But it's really an issue that we're facing in our caucus, the DFL caucus in the House, and across the legislature. So I really do want to encourage all the ideas that come out of the district, the administrators, boards, moms and dads, and teachers as well, to appreciate that issue and the way we might be able to help you approach it and solve it.
That is our number one concern, and part of the way our strategic plan was developed, and Corey could speak more to this, but we have spent time with all of our staff looking at culturally responsive teaching, which is about validating what kids bring to the classroom. Everybody brings their life to the classroom and their culture to the classroom, and sometimes without realizing it, the way we approach education as a system in the United States can run counter, and it's not that the students don't have the ability. There may be just a mismatch in the way they think about it. So that's one of the approaches that we're using, and we've spent the last 3 or 4 years working on enhancing our skills there, and we're continuing to look at that. The ideas that are coming out of Reimagine Minnesota, we've been very happy that they're already in our plan for the most part, but then the idea of taking those next steps with what does it mean for the opportunities? Summer school for most kids probably doesn't need to be academic, it needs to be enrichment, because many of the gap areas has to do with opportunities, that kids that have that ability to do certain things and be enriched, their thinking is enhanced differently, and sometimes we get caught up on the academic piece and realize that enrichment for a student that has that ability really helps them move forward. And I'd stop in case you want to add anything there, Corey, because I had a lot of coffee today.
No, Keith, I agree with everything you said, and a lot of it is funding too. We talk about opportunity gaps and providing enrichment activities for students, but that costs, it's money, it's time, it's transportation, it's also providing snacks, it's making sure it's the appropriate enrichment activity to make sure that we're closing that opportunity gap. The other piece too that we had on our support opportunities for all students was providing more guidance on cultural competency expectations for teachers, but then not only just classroom teachers, but also all educational staff, because we're all working with kids. And there's not really a guidance on, and when I say that, I mean like our paras, our nurses, our transportation, because it takes a village. And we're all in this together. And so those are the big pieces that were put on here that stood out, was that guidance. And what I mean by guidance is expectations, but then also not 1 to 2 hour, because we know professional development is more than 1 and 2 hours. You're not, that's just surface scratching.
Can I ask a question, Corey? So I know because I was real involved in the relicensure process, and we fought hard to make sure the cultural competency was kept in there. I know a lot of this work is being done by Pelsby and this, I know this is not all aspects of staff, but in trying to do some of that definitional work and making sure that there's better support there. Are you seeing that so far, or I mean, because part of it's the difference of what happens in statute and then what gets implemented at the rules level.
So I will let me give a caveat here for 6 months, so anybody else can jump in. So as far as Pelsby, I'm learning more about that right now. So I don't know how many of our teachers have gone through the cultural competency. I know here in our district we do work, equity work, with professional development days that all staff can go through. It's in our strategic plan. So I can't quite answer that question right now. If you give me time, I can find out that information and let you know.
Please stay in touch on that because it's something that I'm real concerned about.
Okay.
And I actually sit on a Pellsby committee that looks at applications to teach courses and is the approval process. But with our work, a one-time course is great to touch the topic, but it needs to be ongoing. The work that we've done with cultural responsive teaching, we have coaches that then come in and work with our teachers, and so we can get better at it. But it's ongoing. We've been into this a number of years, and we still have a lot of work to do. But I would invite you, we have some superstars and some outstanding things that you could see in our classroom on things that are working. But in a large district, we're very open that we have challenges and we have the opportunity gaps that we have got to close, and they've been stubborn just like other areas of the state, and we have to make some strides there. We did add, again, that there is the funding we get for English language learners there's about $2.5 million less than what we need to support the needs of our EL population, and that's growing. So we use the term cross-subsidy because they have that, because that's part of our overall cross-subsidy too. So that's another need, and again, that comes as a funding. But I think our English language kids have been forgotten in the support in the challenges that we have. So that's another element. And then the last element, and I'll have Kevin talk a little bit about that, is that as we are fortunate in our district with teacher candidates, but the tiered licensing system that gave some flexibility. We want to make sure that we continue to look at that as we recruit teachers and bring people in, that it makes it easier for them to get started if they hold a license in some other areas. And so
I just wanted to add that it's also just as important for our teachers to reflect the students that are in our classroom as well. And so our goal in the district is part of our strategic planning goals and such is to increase the number of teachers of color in our district. And I think we're doing a great job of doing it. It could be better, right? But there's only a certain number of candidates within Minnesota. And so we're looking to go out of state to recruit candidates of color. So it would be helpful to just have multiple pathways or multiple ways that teachers can get licensed to work here in Minnesota to get started.
And again, given my work on the Pellsby, it's got to be one of the best bits of alphabet soup in state government. The Professional Education Licensing and Standards Board, that was very much at the heart of that work, was trying to make sure that there were alternate pathways, recognizing that the traditional path to become a teacher doesn't always work for everybody today. And so that's another one I would like to continue having conversations with, because we're all kicking the tires on this as we're implementing it. And so where there are areas for improvement, and bring them to us, I would really like to hear it.
In terms of the alternate licensing, I had many long years ago when I was going to college to become an educator, I had a professor who told me it's not enough to know your stuff, you have to know how to stuff them. And so as you're looking at that alternative licensure, I would encourage that expertise in a content area gets paired with expertise in pedagogy as well.
Yeah, the quality is really important. And I know there's been a lot of discussions about that. We have a number of folks that come out of different walks of life that are later in life that have wisdom, and to try to get them into our profession is important, in some of that flexibility. But as mentioned, it has to be in the areas and the rigor that allows them to come in and do a job. And so
I just want to follow up real quickly what Louise said, because I agree with you completely. And that too was at the heart of what we were trying to do, was to make sure that, just because not everybody can afford to have a year basically unpaid to do student teaching, how can we give people that same type of experience, but with a different framework? We absolutely want to make sure that we're not lowering the standards of what we're requiring, but how people can achieve it and demonstrate it. That's where we want to be able to make sure we're doing it.
I would just add that we don't want to, I wholeheartedly agree, we don't want to lower the standards, like making sure that we have licensed teachers in our early education classes, if they're going to be teaching classes.
Well, I'm disappointed that's the end of our list. So we'd like to give you a chance to just talk about the session, anything, and again, what you foresee, things we can be helpful with, and then we'll close up and get you on your way. But so I'd allow you to.
Well, first of all, I know I've said this before, but Superintendent Jacobus, I thank you. I appreciate your willingness. I mean, think I've called you at 8 o'clock at night when I'm still at the Capitol working on something, and there's a bill amendment, and to get your feedback. How does this impact you? And you're always available, and I want to thank you for that. I appreciate it.
And I'm going to give
Sometimes
you Julie's phone number too this year.
glad to have it. The more the merrier. But it does. It's important for us. You know, we hear information from different sources, but we want to know, how's this going to impact you. It all sounds great, but sometimes we need to hear from you, and maybe there's some aspects that are unintended consequences that maybe aren't so great. One, in fact, I've heard today. With the wage theft laws that went into effect, how that's impacting school districts with some of the reporting, the required reporting, and it wasn't the intent of the bill. The intent of the bill was a noble one, but sometimes you find out that as a result of that, it makes your job more difficult. So I don't know if you want to. I see you want to comment
it works
on
well
that.
for. I think it does not work well for school systems, but it works well for other systems. So it's very labor intensive as we work to implement that, and so we continue to work on that. So thank you for mentioning that.
And that's just one example, but that we, much like the Hippocratic Oath, we try to do no harm, and sometimes it doesn't work. When that happens, so we'll be taking a look at that and other things. But again, I want to thank all the teachers for being here tonight. This is it's a great site. Like I said, I've done this for a few years now, and this is definitely the fullest room I've seen. So it's nice to see you all here and taking an interest, not just in the classroom, but the policymakers that affect your classroom. So thank you for what you do. Thank you for teaching our children, and thank you for being here tonight.
This is always a great opportunity just to exchange ideas and where people are at and just your priorities. So I just appreciate your time and putting this together. I know this takes a lot with staff, and I appreciate our meetings every year up at the Capitol with the board and staff every year with the delegation. So keep in contact, and thank you again to the teachers for being here. That Representative Jurgen said it right, for not only taking the passion in the classroom, but also taking an interest in passion in the legislation and the policy. That's key. I know it's the other component to your job too. So thank you.
Again, thank you very much. This certainly didn't have any surprises in it. I think we all know what we need to do for the best for our children. And I think you know that you can count on me to be working with the other experts on education. While I don't sit on any of those education committees, I sit next to Steve Sandell, and he's my advisor on education issues. So I really do appreciate the conversation. I feel like I've learned a lot about what you are working for, and thank you to the teachers as well. I look forward to hearing more from you in the future.
Yeah, and then thank you. You're giving mics to 6 politicians, so thank you for your patience. But then again, we are a team. The 6 of us, we are a team. We're here to represent you, the entire district. Some school districts, they have one person, 1 or 2. And so you have 6 of us. Please look at us as resources for all of you. And we really appreciate meeting with you. And, our channels of communication are open to all of you, and please reach out. But then again, just want to thank you to all the school board members, all the administrators, and the teachers here. Keith and I, we gave a talk at the TEDx a couple of, I think it was last year already. But then, I grew up in a neighborhood that wasn't so well, but then we moved to a very similar school district to this one. And I don't think I would be up here if it wasn't for the teachers and the school district and all the hard decisions that they had to make. And so, we're all up here. We're not just legislators. We have brothers and sisters in special ed. We've been teachers. We have children in these very schools that we're all talking about. And so You will see the same amount of passion from all of us dealing with all these issues. And so we hope to work with you as a team, as the six of us are working together. And so I thank you all for giving us this opportunity to meet with all of you. Thank you.
And I just want to echo that. This is always a great partnership, and I value it, and I value all of you so much. And you know, as has been said, you know, the many calls and emails that I've sent to various of you on different issues as they come up, and you're always so responsive and helpful. And just like tonight, I mean, these are really great specific examples that help us do our job better to represent the issues and the concerns that you have. So this kind of dialogue is always important, and it doesn't stop tonight. I always love the days on the Hill when folks from 833 come up, parents, administrators, teachers, school board members. And I look forward to that again this year. And teachers, when you guys come, it's always exciting and a really important reminder of the very important work that you all do so well. This will be an interesting session. Again, it's a short one. And, you know, everybody keeps speculating because looming over it all is an election at the end of the year. And that always sort of influences how people behave when they're at the legislature. So we'll see. But you know, I know we will all be working hard to make sure that we're keeping the interests of 833 at the front of our agendas. Thank you.
Well, this is my first year at the legislature, and Tu and I and Annie all arrived about the same time, and we've now served in the legislature for 366 days. Yesterday was our first year anniversary. So, it was my wife took me out to dinner, and she said, "I don't know if I can do this again, but we'll get through this one." I want to say that legislators often hear, or you hear too, about lobbyists, special interest groups. The most effective special interest group is a personal conversation. It doesn't matter if you're the chairman of a corporation or a mom from the school district. A personal conversation is the best way to influence the decisions that we make. It puts a personality, a passion, emotion, and experience behind a question or a suggestion. And I think all of us would agree that those are the best moments of our lives as legislators, personal conversations with each of our constituents. Superintendent, members of the board, and members of the administration, and certainly members of the audience tonight, and all the teachers. Thanks very much for all of us for having a chance to be here, and also to continue the conversation after a formal meeting like this. Thanks.
Thank you for being here, and we'll get you on your way.
Thank you all for your time tonight. We really appreciate it. Like walked out.
I don't know if the video, but
relating to the annual audit of the district's financial statements for the fiscal year 18-19. The district again received an unmodified or what would be considered a clean opinion. Attached or in the attachments, and also you have some paper copies, are the financial documents which will be reviewed during the meeting. The audit results were presented to the board's audit and finance committee previous to the board meeting, and that happened on last Thursday night. I really want to thank our fiscal services director, Chris Blackburn, and the rest of our staff for all the work they did put into putting together this document. We all know that we're the 6th largest district in the state, which means that we have the 6th largest budget, which means we have the 6th most budget lines, I'm sure. And it's a lot of work, and it's basically done by Chris. I help a little, and some other people help a little, and she does a lot of work on this, and it always comes out with a good opinion. And once again, we will apply for the Certificate of Excellence in Financial Reporting given by the Association of School Business Officials International. We've received that award for the last 13 years, and we expect to receive it again. We ask the board to accept this report after the presentation. And with that, I'll turn it over to Aaron. Looks like the PowerPoint came up.
Good evening. Can you hear me okay? Well, thank you. Again, I appreciate the opportunity to be here this evening. My name is Aaron Nielsen. I'm a partner with MMKR, Malloy, Montague, Karnowski, Radosevich, and we are independent auditors working for the school board, for the district, for the public to present our audit this evening. Tonight I have this PowerPoint presentation to go through. You received a lot of information in your packets. I appreciate the opportunity to meet with the finance group last week, and I thought we had a very good discussion going through the documents in a little more detail. So tonight I just intend to flip through my PowerPoint presentation to share some of the highlights of our discussion. So you did receive 4 reports in your package, the comprehensive annual financial report, the separate student activity audit, the special purpose report, and then our separate management report. And this PowerPoint is just some of the slides we pulled from that management report. So I'll begin sharing our role to issue the opinion as independent auditors of the district on the district audit, as well as the separate student activity audit. We've also issued the report on internal controls and compliance over the areas we've noted here with the financial statement audit under government auditing standards, separate federal single audit, as well as then the state auditors, Minnesota legal compliance audit, and then manual for activity fund accounting. And I'll get right to it with the results of our audit this past year. As Mr. Pyan mentioned, we have issued what is known as the unmodified or clean opinion that your financial statements are fairly stated for the year ended June 30th, 2019. With regard to all the reports I mentioned over compliance and internal controls, we had just one comment that we're pleased. We had only the one comment to report this evening, and then in internal control over compliance. And that was in that separate federal audit this past year. So we had no instances of non-compliance, but just a comment on internal controls that we shared with you. On the separate student activity audit, we had just a couple of comments. We've issued a report that the statement of cash receipts and disbursements is fairly presented, so it's a little different that it's under a basis of accounting as required by the Minnesota Department of Education. So we have issued a report that those cash receipts and disbursements are fairly presented that have been reported. With regard to the internal control and compliance, we just had 2 comments this past year. The first comment is on the completeness and reporting of the cash receipts for the student activity audit. And I'll share actually all of the student activity reports I've issued this past year received that same comment. The second comment I had is with regard to compliance with that manual for activity fund accounting, and we had just one comment there. For some of the groups or a couple of the groups, we had noted that they were missing that activity purpose form that is required annually for those groups. The last point I've noted there is an emphasis of a matter that we included a paragraph in the financial statement, and that was new this year, and we're sharing that with you tonight because it'll be the last year that these student activities are reported separately from the district audit. So beginning July 1, 2019 for the 1920 school year, they're now required to be accounted for within your general fund, like all school districts in the state this year with new GASB guidance that was issued for this current year. Or I should say the year you're operating. My next slide is a calculation that is actually prepared by the Minnesota Department of Education, and then we've put alongside it a statewide average snapshot for the past 10 years. So the June 30th calculation by the Minnesota Department of Education for your district, which we've put in the blue bar that you can see there, and then the statewide average and the yellow bar that we've presented there through what's available through the June 30th, 2018 year. For this past year that we have comparable information, that statewide average is at 20% compared to district's average at 1.4%. When we get to the end of 2019, you can see there is an improvement up to 4.4% at the end of 2019, but we won't have the statewide average for several months until the state has the time to accumulate and put that information together and be available for us. So we do know that these, or I do know, having worked with the district, that these were not surprises and they were planned spend down over the time, but it is a good slide that is a calculation prepared separately by the Department of Education.
I think this is always a good slide to come forward with because as our fund balance gets healthier, which is still not very healthy, then there's always a concern of, a bit like Susan said at the state level, that there's extra money, and so we want to do certain things with it. We really have to, as Dan has guided us, move back toward that 15% range. You know, our policy is 5 to 9. We'd like to have more there. That gives us a lot of flexibility when issues come forward, and some of the things that we talked about with kids. So.
And I did mean to comment, I've got another fund balance percentage later in the report, and this is a different calculation. So the state does back off certain restricted expenditures, so their denominator in the calculation is different from ours and your policy.
I don't normally speak in a microphone. Is this in line with like what the median, like what is the range of general fund balance, do you know, across the state? Like if we've got a 1.4 on presumably the low end, or maybe there's somebody even lower, what is on the high side?
I do have some that are well over that.
Sorry, 6-0?
Sure.
And did you say 60%, 60? Yeah.
And so we have districts on both ends of it, obviously, and creating that average. So I have seen some districts well above that average, and then obviously some districts that are below it to create that average at what is really held at about a 20% level for the past several years, as you can see.
Is that like a median level? Like if you were to look at the median as opposed to that, this is an average, correct?
Correct. Yeah. The districts. So we've taken the fund balance for all the districts and divided by the number of the districts. Yes.
Do you know what the median fund balance is?
I do not.
And there is a point, I think, that you don't want a 60% fund balance. We're not a bank. We're here to educate kids and spend that money. But Dan, and we feel that mid-15, and if we get to that point, then we might look at what our policy is. But certainly the 5% is low, and we want to, I feel really good about, you can see how that trend data has gone that way. We're moving forward now with a lot of work over the years on contracting budgets and being very fiscally careful, but also the growth will help us to move forward. But once we get back to the 5 to 9%, then at least we're within the policy, which the board had agreed to allow that spend down, so we didn't reduce programming and cut things for kids. But yeah, that's a good question on median. Maybe MASBO has that at some point, but I haven't seen that calculation.
And I can share some rules of thumb. I'll save it for a couple of slides when we get to the fund balance calculations for your district as well. The next slide we share is the adjusted ADM, or that average daily membership that you've been serving for the past 10 years. The past 10 years are final numbers. The 2019 is still an estimate. Again, it won't be finalized until a couple of months from now. But for this past year, the district served an average ADM of 18,545 students, which is just a slight decrease, so basically flat from the prior year, about 0.1% change from 2018. Looking at your primary operating fund, the general fund, and the financial position. So we've got 10 years of history here looking at the cash and investment balance, that unrestricted fund balance, and the expenditures kind of as a gauge for the size of your overall operation. As you know, you've been a growing district and the students you've been serving, and then the needs to serve those students, as you can see over this 10-year period, looking at your expenditures. If you consider back in 2012, it looks a little bit disoriented with the cash looking negative. That was caused by timing and metering of state aid payments and tax shifts that were imposed at that time. So it is a little bit different than what you're seeing the past few years, where the metering is back to normal and has held at that 90% schedule for the last several years. The next slide is the one I was referring to and I wanted to comment on. So we'll dive a little bit deeper in the general fund and the components of the fund balance. So looking at that year-end equity for the general fund operation, breaking it down to the categories of non-spendable, which captures the prepaids, the inventory items of the fund balance, the restricted long-term facilities maintenance, operating capital, staff development, those sort of state restricted fund balances that are required to be spent in a certain manner, captured in that category. And then you have a further breakdown within the unrestricted, where there's a little more local control, the committed, where you've got committed fund balances by the school board, assigned fund balance, which includes when you have a budget that you're deficit spending or utilizing fund balance. That's what can go into that category, and also what you assign for specific purposes, and then everything else falls into that unassigned fund balance. So as you can see, we're pleased to report that the district did see an improvement in those fund balance calculations. And as I mentioned, these calculations are different than what we looked at on that statewide calc, because we're looking at all expenditures of the general fund. So when we look at that unrestricted, capturing the committed, assigned, and unassigned fund balances, you can see you ended at 2.9%. And that compares to your fund balance policy, as mentioned, where you're trying to strive to get to the 5 to 9%. At that 2.9%, you're sitting at less than about 2.2 weeks of operations when you break it out. If you're spending more level, which we know it is not over the year, but just to try to put that into different terms. Looking at the unassigned fund balance, which is just that one component, you ended the year at 1.4%. So what I wanted to share too, some of the rules of thumb that you see in literature, generally 5 to 10%, that is a common rule of thumb. Another one is 1 to 2 months of operation. So that gets you from 8% to nearly 16, 17% based on the math of how that calculates out. So those are just some guides that we share when we look at the Government Finance Officers Association for information and what they use. As independent auditors, I can't recommend where you should be, but those are good rules of thumb that they use. And you also have to weigh that on what are your cash flow needs throughout the year, as well as what are your sources, how stable are those sources of funding, because if you're dependent on a certain source and it's not going to be there, you need to probably carry a heavier fund balance if you're concerned about not receiving resources. When we look at the next couple of slides, I've got 2 more for the general fund. Looking at your general fund revenues, and I know it was discussed at the last presentation where you're receiving your dollars. Your total general fund revenues for the year ended June 30th, 2019 totaled $243 million for your general fund. That ended favorably compared to the budget, ending at about 1.3% over what was anticipated in the general fund budget. And that represents an increase of about 7.3% over the prior year. One thing I've tended to comment on with all of my meetings, as you can see, the reliance our districts are to receiving state resources, as I'm very informative with your legislators. This past year, your state resources represented 73.8% of your funding for the general fund, and then followed by 22% of property taxes, 22.3%. And I know, as Dr. Jacobus mentioned, the federal funding this past year made up about 1.7%, and the other local sources, which include the fees and investment earnings, rounded off at 2.2%. When we go to the general fund expenditures, a similar graph looking at budget to actual to the prior year. This past year, total expenditures ended the year at $235.6 million for the general fund. Again, I would say ending with a favorable variance of about 1.9% under budget, and then about 3.8% over the prior year. As I know we've commented in the past, it is very personal in the general fund, with salaries and benefits making up the majority of the cost to educate your students, making up about 81.5% of the spending in the general fund, which really drives where those variances occurred. The general fund spending was 1.2% under budget for salary and benefits, and then 3.7% as approved with your contractual agreements this past year over the prior year. My next slide, we look at two remaining operating funds as we consider them: the Food Service Special Revenue Fund and then the Community Service Special Revenue Fund. So when we get to the presentation for these two funds, we have just the one slide combining them. As we talked about, the general fund spending this past year, $235 million, or almost $236. The spending in the food service operation was at about $9.7 million. And then within the Community Service Fund, it was at $14.8 million. So not nearly to the scale of what the general fund is, but I realize these are not small operations and are larger in some school districts. When we look at the general fund balance for the food service this past year, that fund balance is at 12.9% of their annual spending. And then we were pleased to see the Community Service Fund with a slight increase, or an increase in their fund balance to 3.5% of their annual spending. And I know we talked a little bit at the Finance Committee meeting. It does get broken down a little bit further within components, and there are a couple of categories that are reporting deficits, but liking to see this improvement in the fund balance. And then just a couple of more slides, and I can open it up for some questions. When the next slide here we have is your internal service funds. So you operated 3 funds this past year, which included for the district's severance account, the pension benefits of the district's local pension account, and then the OPEB internal service fund, which actually was closed this year, and we had a good discussion about that and how the district has transitioned to using an irrevocable trust fund. So resources are now also set aside in an irrevocable trust fund at the end of it began in 2018, but that's where the accounting is occurring in the future here at the end of 2018. And then my last slide, which I know is every one of my school district's favorite ones. So to this point, we've been talking about it on a fund basis, looking at how I believe all my districts are operating with the passage of their budgets and reports on a monthly basis that you receive. What we provide here in this current reporting model is we look at the individual funds within the financial statement, which you get the dual perspective where we also consolidate all of the governmental funds, incorporate the internal service fund activity. So to this point within the governmental funds, they do not capture the capital assets of the organization, nor do they capture the long-term obligations. So that's what this dual perspective I refer to captures, where we incorporate the long-term obligations, the bonds that you've issued to build your infrastructure, and then also capturing the capital assets of the organization. So when we look at this, you can see there was an increase of $70 million this past year. I know we've presented in the past where I went the other direction, and it's really been driven in recent years with the change in our pension obligation reporting and the OPEB obligations of the district, really the statewide PERA and the TR pension obligations. So as you can see, there was a significant improvement this past year in the proportion that you had to report on your financial statements, and that's what you're seeing fall to that bottom line as well as within that unrestricted category. We also talked quite a bit about the improvement in the investment in capital assets, and it's good to see that increase there. You're paying off your obligations at a faster pace than the buildings are being depreciated. You're also using capital levies to invest in the infrastructure for your organization, which is also contributing to that. But as we noted, it doesn't provide current resources resources are liquid resources that you can put further into the classroom. Again, they are tied up in the infrastructure of your organization. So with that, I know I went through a lot of information. As Dan mentioned, you've prepared your financial statements as a comprehensive annual financial report, so you get more than 125 pages of data and information in that document. And in addition to the other 3 documents you've received, but I'd be happy to try to answer any questions and any of them.
Just point out on internal service fund, that's our post-retirement obligations. We had been putting money into that for years till we got into the situation where we didn't have that flexibility. And so we reduced that and actually took some funds out. But we have, I think, Aaron, you said maybe 4 years. If we didn't do anything, we'd exhaust that fund. So we're going to have to start looking at that again too. That impacts how quickly our overall fund balance health can increase because we have those obligations. Was I accurate from that? I can't remember when we talked.
I know we talked about it at the finance committee meeting. I'm not sure how many years Chris had mentioned with that. There are $3.2 million in that other post-employment benefit trust fund at the year end, and I think you're spending about $1 million a year, so maybe 3 years might have been what we shared.
So it's not something that we need to look at for this year, but it's something next year as we go forward to take a look at making sure we have those obligations taken care of.
If there are no other questions, thank you very much. All right, 8.2, first reading of our revised 2021 calendar. Dr. Jacobus.
Great. So we actually started looking at our 21-22 calendar, and after the changes we made to this year, there were some things that came forward from teachers and other staff members about how we could improve some of the changes we made. So we're bringing forward proposed changes for next year, and there's 3 of them outlined in the report. But the first thing that we would like to do is currently our 9th graders start, they come in on their own that first day. So there's a good transition. Our link leaders work with kids to get them prepared to get ready for high school. We in the past have done something in the summer with our 6th graders, and we'd like to move that day as a transition day for them as well. So at the middle school level, have our 6th graders come in just like the 9th graders. It gives the 8th graders, which we have the web program, which is the middle school version of connecting kids with 8th graders and giving them that guidance. So that first day would change for who comes to school. It would be K through 6 and grade 9. The other thing we looked at is around the MEA break, we had added some time, vacation time, and giving some flexibility for different elements. But that time after we went through it, teachers talked about that. It was a little long, particularly for our kindergarten kids. They just got into the structure of school, and then they were off a number of days, and then they start over, those little folks. And as much as we like the shorter breaks, what we looked at moving, we had a professional development day attached in that area, and we would move that to our November 3rd election day. We have that day off because of safety issues for kids, but we certainly can be in the building as adults. So we wanted to move that to the November 3rd date. And then we looked at, then we'd make that October 14th day a day for kids K through 8 and testing for grades 10 through 12. And then finally we had to break up the spring, we had a day off for staff and students in April, and the discussion was, why don't we make the April 26th a professional development day and move that day. It was attached around spring break, so we moved it to April. So kids will be off, but we will have a professional development day on the 30th. So those changes, those 3 areas of changes came about from staff and the calendar committee looking at, after we started into the change of the calendar this year, we felt like it would improve. And so that was what we would bring forward. We feel like in January, there'd be time to adjust for parents. And then as we get into the 21-22, we would roll all of this forward just with corresponding dates.
Is that first day where K through 6 goes and then 9th graders, does that 6th grade day replace Camp 6 then?
Yes. And we felt all of the staff is there too. So it's like the high school when they're going through their schedule, they meet all teachers, and teachers can be involved in other things. And the same can happen then for the 6th grade.
Anyone else? Definitely appreciate the time that you put into talking with our teachers and adjusting so that we can do the best we can for the kids and the teachers. So that's awesome.
And this year with the calendar committee, calendars are always tough because everybody has strong opinions, but this came forward through the committee and everyone was in agreement. So we took a look at that. So we'll bring this back for final approval. So as you think about things, if there's questions as we go through, then it'll be on the agenda 2 weeks from now for formal adoption.
Okay, thank you. So then 8.3 is the first reading of our 22 calendar.
And as much as we can, we'd like to keep consistency for our parents and our staff. And we do that in this calendar by taking next year's calendar and rolling it over with corresponding dates. So we do the same thing with what we would do with transitions for kids at the beginning of the year. We moved around where the MEA breaks are, so there aren't any changes from what we just talked about. And then again, that gives parents a long time to adjust so they can plan their time with kids and vacations. Yeah, we run into some difficulties on trying to end. So when we looked at the changes, we don't have the best situation at the end. But we also struggle, as you know, that the end of school is tough to keep kids going and things like that. And so we had a bit of a discussion that we'd like to end on a full week, but we feel like the things that we do sometimes at the end of the year can be done on a Monday. So it's, with all of the trying to make things work out, yeah, it's not the cleanest end. And we've tried to limit how far we go into June and put as many instruction days in front of those testing windows as possible. Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
All right. So like I said, that these will be back next meeting on January 23rd. 8.4 is our negotiations update, and Katie Schwartz will give us the update.
November 19th, members of the United Teachers of South Washington County voted not to approve the tentative agreement that would settle the 2019-21 teachers contract. Union leadership previously agreed to a tentative agreement that would have provided flexible workdays for teachers, significant increases to healthcare contributions, and salary increases in March and July. While the school board and district negotiation team is disappointed that the initial agreement did not pass, we are committed to working together to reach an agreement that will benefit our students and those who contribute to their success. The district is looking forward to working with union leadership to identify their priorities and to restructure the current offer under our budget limitations. District 833 works hard to use taxpayer dollars wisely and continues to seek ways to be more efficient and effective in educating our kids. Like many school districts across Minnesota, state and federal funding has not kept pace with inflation or the education needs of our students. The negotiation team will meet next on January 23rd.
9.0 discussion items. We don't have any this evening. 10.0 are the action items. 10.1 is the approval of our board committees. So you had received the email with the assignments for the different schools and the different committees. And I did talk to a couple people. We did make a few adjustments. So the new ones I think were sent out on Tuesday. So just one quick thing, if you can't make a meeting, so of course Pat is sick and she won't be able to go to AMSD tomorrow. If there is ever a time where you can't, maybe let us know and maybe we can put someone else or someone else will have time to be able to go in your place. And then if down the road you have a problem and are no longer able to make those obligations to attend any of these committees that you are assigned to, please just let us know and maybe find someone else who might have a little more flexibility in their schedule. So first, I guess I will entertain a motion to approve the board committees.
So moved.
Okay, moved by Katie, second by Louise. And any questions or comments, concerns on the assignments? All right, well, thanks everybody for working together on this. Like I said, we did have a few movements, and we were able to give most people, I think it was at least 3 or 4 of their number 1 choices. So hopefully they will all work out, and we'll have a great year doing fulfilling our assignments. So with that, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. 10.2 is the approval of a board member's employment through January of 2020, and Dr. Jacobus will present this.
There are statutes that regulate when you become a board member, your employment within the school district. There's limitations on a dollar amount that they have, but also if a board member does work in any capacity in the school district, a vote of the board has to be taken. So Louise is coming on, and she's had a great career as a teacher in the district, and then as she was transitioning, she was subbing, but she's been our coach for our math league. That goes throughout the year, and their culminating meet comes in January. So I'm bringing forward a request for action to allow Louise to finish the coaching. It makes sense because the kids depend on her, and we've got a long history, and there's one more event, and then the season's over. And so I'm asking Monday. Yeah, yep. And it's
You
yeah,
can't do it.
exactly. And it's wonderful to have board members involved. The employment part is always difficult. So I'm asking for approval to say yep for the coaching and yes for the coaching, and then to finish the season.
All right. So I will entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Sharon, second by Katie. Any questions, comments? All right, hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Yes. All right, and good luck on Monday.
Melinda's son is also competing.
Cool.
Different team, yeah, different team.
Okay. 11.0, reports and comments. 11.1 is our superintendent's report.
Thank you. First, I'd like to welcome our new members, and it's exciting now that we have you're sworn in and we're ready to go, and because we have a lot of exciting things happening as we go through the spring. And one of them I just want to give you a quick update on is our long-range facility planning. So the district is continuing to work to update our long-range facility plan with the following 2 goals. One is to develop a long-range facility plan that will achieve the best possible learning environment for current and future students by ensuring that we have adequate classroom space at all grade levels, elementary, middle, and high school, to meet our projected enrollment for 2030. As we've said, the demographic study, we expect about 3,500 new kids, and every time you drive around our district, you see new homes, and so that we're being proactive in our planning. The other goal is to determine what, if any, facility modifications would be recommended at our existing schools while focusing on size of the school, efficiency of the school, and operating, and school changes and adjustments in curriculum. We know, as we talked about online learning, that there may be some changes in the way education is delivered by the end of this plan, and then how that would affect us. So development of our long-range facility plan continues, and we have a long-range facility task force, which is made up of community members and stakeholders, representation from each of our schools. And then we have a long-range steering committee, which are district administrators and district stakeholders that are guiding the process. And they have reviewed plans for secondary schools, and now they have begun reviewing plans for the elementary schools. The task force has analyzed and prioritized and given input around the secondary school plans. The task force has a meeting scheduled for Monday, January 13th, and they will be analyzing and prioritizing and giving input on the elementary plans. The elementary school plans also include district-wide department facilities needs, such as the needs we have in teaching and learning as we expand, our transportation department, building and grounds, our district administration space here at this site, and community education. Once the plans have been narrowed down, the steering committee will be asking for input from advisory teams. We're going to go out to all our advisories, our Citizens Finance Committee, our Teaching and Learning, our Special Education Advisory, and gather input from them. And then we'll go out to district staff, and we're going to ask our students and city officials, and we anticipate that we'll give another 200 stakeholder voices to the process so they can weigh in on what we're thinking on the plans prior to going out and conducting a district-wide survey. So then the next step would be do a formalized survey and hosting also large community input sessions like we have done with our boundary changes and our last bond elections. So the current timeline includes focus groups occurring in February, a community survey in April or May, and community meetings to be held in August. The board will be presented a more detailed update on our long-range facilities planning process at the January 23rd board meeting. And then my favorite topic, it's always good to talk about weather closures. So we're into January, and I just heard the weather next week. We're supposed to have another quite cold spell about midweek, and by Thursday be down by that 20 below. But I hope we're going to bounce back. So I just want to remind our public and talk a little bit about this because it's one of the most difficult things we do. So as a superintendent, as you know, I'm charged with making the decision to cancel school or to hold a 2-hour delay or to just cancel after school activities for a wide variety of weather conditions. No matter what the specific situation may be, our first consideration is the safety of our students. So in order to make the decision, I consult with our internal staff, our transportation department, and external experts like our National Weather Service, our cities to tell us about the plowing capabilities, and then I talk with neighboring school districts as appropriate. I'd like to make the decision on winter weather closures as early as possible. However, as you know, winter weather can be unpredictable and often forecasts are changing by the hour. And that's why I don't want, and I will want to make the commitment that the decision will be made or won't be made until 5:30 in the morning for potential closures. You've seen that over the years that districts are closing in the evening before. And St. Paul, and as I mentioned last year, St. Paul and Minneapolis have, but their issues are much different than us with the city streets and the ability to get the buses through. So we can't look at those two districts and say that's the same because their challenges are much different. But many of the districts have been closing in the evening, and I have a lot of pressure to do that, but I'm very concerned on making an accurate decision and not closing because many of our kids, they come into school and that's their meal. Their parents may not be able to go to work that day. So, and we want them learning. So it's important for me that students come to school, not just to learn, but to have a safe and warm place to be for the day, to receive healthy breakfast and lunch, and be surrounded by our caring staff like we talked about with the personalization. For cold weather, we evaluate the length of the forecasted temperature or wind chill as well as timing. So we can limit the exposure of students who have to wait or walk to the school for the school bus. And again, many times the wind chill warnings, the coldest weather might happen at 3 in the morning. So they give us accurate forecasts of when our first kids at bus stops at 6:30 in the morning, what will the temperature be? And it'll change from even across the district. And so the Weather Service is very accurate on that, but we'll take a look at that. For snowy weather, we evaluate the forecasted snow amounts, the timing of the snow, and our ability to clear parking lots and school walkways. We also contact cities to evaluate the roadways, the abilities for our buses to transport kids safely. Above all, the safety of our students in getting to and from school is the main concern and the main factor in the final decision. The decision to cancel school is never an easy one, but the students placed in our care are always our first consideration. So as you know, over the years, we've had more and more closures. When I came to Minnesota in 2010, I started in a district where the superintendent at the time had spent her entire career there, and she couldn't remember a closure. And that's in the metro area. And in the last 10 years, for a variety of reasons, it's become much more common to close. It puts a lot more pressure. I also want to remind our parents that they are the ultimate decision maker. If they feel like we are open and it's unsafe, then they have the choice to keep their students home. That allows them to make a decision for one or as many children as they have, and allows me to think of 19,000 and what we need to do to keep them safe. But also that when we lose a day of instruction, we don't have as many days, and the best thing we feel selfishly is to have kids in school. So again, we'll get into that. I wish it wasn't something we have to deal with every winter, but it is. So I always like to have the reminder as we get into January. In fact, I was reminded that last year, right around this time, is when we had one of the coldest snaps in the past. They were talking about it on the radio. So we're fortunate the winter's been a little mild, even though it's been
What do you take into consideration for walkers, like an average time of how much time do they
Yeah.
spend walking?
Walking is a tough one because when you're talking about, the severe wind chills that they talk about when they start, those warnings start at somewhere around the -35. Well, if it's -20, that's awful cold. And our walking distances now for our secondary kids are 2 miles. And that is as we talked about when we had the budget reductions, we had to increase that walking distance. We committed that we wanted to go back as soon as we can and reduce that. And we haven't been able to do that because we haven't had the flexibility. But I really look at more of the bus safety and the walkers. We do a number of things with our kids to, if they're out or within that 2 miles, if they can walk backwards, we call it, and go to a bus stop that might be a half mile from their house away, we allow them to get on the bus. Carrie Olson, our transportation director, is wonderfully flexible if we have buses. And so we run some shuttle buses in the cold weather that we only run at certain times. But that depends too if we have drivers available and buses. So walking is one that really I struggle with as we get into the winter. And I want to just put that in your mind because as we look at having any flexibility in the budget, we want to take a look at the walkers. That may mean now at this point trying to put together money for purchasing buses and drivers, but also that increased cost. We used to estimate it was about $250,000, but I don't think about that as much as the buses. I don't mean to say that callously, but we think of probably the walkers. That may be the time when parents decide, I don't think it's you can get to school that day. So we're very flexible with our kids and try to work through it with them.
11.2, our school board member reports. I know it's early, but would you like to say anything, Melinda?
Same. I think we're learning phase 1 and phase 2 and the convention next week. So presumably by next Friday, I will know a lot more than I do today. Find out.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, thank you. Katie.
I'll pass tonight. Thank you.
I had a chance to take a tour of 916 this morning. It's a program that I wasn't familiar with, so that was very interesting to me. And I'm looking forward to Oltman's Raider Rally
I attended that great training that we had, and I'm going to say that because as time goes by, you forget some of the things that you should know. But so, and it was right on time because next week I will be presenting at the Minnesota School Board Association on fetal alcohol syndrome disorder with Shauna Fine, who is the senior training director for Proofs Alliance. So I don't know what I'm talking about, but I'll be talking about something. Mostly the rules and statutes and the laws that govern um, the administration and what the responsibility of the district is on fetal alcohol syndrome. So I read a little bit about it. It's a lot to learn. And Kelly, whoa, girl, you're on it. So I look forward to pricking her brain to find out what I need to talk about. So we'll see.
Yeah, we had a training of the board on Tuesday night, which was great, covering management versus governance. We had our attorney there talking about open meeting laws and things like that. It's a great refresher, like you said. I've been through it just a couple of times, but it's just really nice to have that information and have that time to have some training as a board. And then I did hear the audit one other time on last week. So, all right, 12.0 future meeting dates. We will be meeting January 23rd as a regular board meeting and then February 6th as a regular board meeting. And with that, we are adjourned.